Welcome to Unbound, the podcast with Beth Curry, author, storyteller, and survivor. This is where books meet real life, where Beth reads chapters from her work and breaks free from the traditional audiobook format, diving deeper into the personal experiences, lessons, and liberation behind every page. Nothing is off limits. Let's get unbound.
Hello, and welcome to Unbound Off Script, where I talk about whatever the hell I want, or whatever the hell you want. You know, some people have suggestions for me, and I love that. So please, if you have anything you want me to talk about, any cold cases you're curious about, any weird shit, anything at all, let me know, because I love a good topic, and I love to dig, and I love to research, and I love to write, and apparently I love to talk. I had no idea. Anyway, I'm so glad you're here with me today. And today, once again, I am going deep into some psychology shit. Season 2 of the podcast is beginning this week. And there's a chapter or two in there where I kind of discuss how changing as much as I did when I lost 200 pounds, you know, it affected my relationships with people and how that was kind of shocking and difficult for me. And I'm going through that again now, so it shouldn't be shocking or difficult for me knowing what I know from like 10 years ago, but it is. And I want to talk about that and what's happening and why. So this isn't so much about me releasing weight on my body. It's about me releasing the weight of like 35 years of trauma that I've held inside. You know, whoever the hell they are, say that healing isn't linear. I hate that word. It's so overused. Healing isn't linear. I say it a lot. I hate it. Anyway, that growth, you know, it comes in waves. But what they don't always tell you is that sometimes when you finally start to heal, like really, really heal, you might look around and realize that the world you're stepping into doesn't quite match the one you're leaving behind. Does that make sense? And more painfully, the people you thought, you know, would be walking beside you aren't really there anymore. Not because they left, but because you can finally see clearly enough to understand that maybe you were never walking the same path to begin with. Does that make sense? I'm going to ask that a couple times as if you're responding to me, which you're not. But anyway, once again, I don't think this gets discussed enough in conversations about healing and personal growth. And that's the grief that comes with getting better. You know, it's a strange and complicated mourning process, I think, that happens when trauma therapy actually works, you know, and that fogginess lifts and you're kind of left standing in this landscape that looks entirely different than you remembered, right? So for so long, the way that I was in my head, when I had minimal understanding and I didn't want to deal with what I've been holding inside, and I didn't want to come clean about things, and I didn't want to put my ego aside, and I didn't want to share things because I was afraid of being judged or called a liar, because let's face it, I was for a good chunk of my life. I'd look at other chicks and think, oh, she's so soft and girly and a delicate flower, and here I am feeling like the claw end of a hammer, right? Like I've always been rebellious, you know, just kind of edgy in the sense that I don't, you know, just believe what I'm being fed about literally anything. And I don't disrespect authority, but I'm willing to question it and challenge it if it's fair. And I have questions, you know, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. When season 3 starts, this will make a lot more sense, who I am and why I am the way I am. It goes all the way back to kindergarten. So yeah, I've kind of been that rebellious outsider, you know, stone cold, hard, you know, I wasn't soft, just like the claw end of a hammer, right? I could be sweet, sure. I mean, you know, the way Nate describes me, he says I'm more than a spark, I'm the whole damn fire. You know, that's not pretty. It's not precious and sweet and cute and girly. So yeah, that's never been me. It's not who I am. If you've been listening to other off-script episodes, this what's coming here may feel a bit redundant, but it's important context, I think. This episode, I'm going to talk about 9D breath work. It's a modality that after, 35 years of carrying this trauma, it finally gave me the keys to freedom, I'm going to talk about the clarity and the values and I guess the unexpected cost of healing. What happens when you're doing the work on yourself, and it means facing uncomfortable truths, not just about you, but the people around you. And, learning sometimes painfully that protecting your peace isn't selfish. It's pretty much survival. So I don't know, this conversation might get uncomfortable. I will probably ramble a bit. It might feel familiar. If you've ever felt like you're grieving people who are still alive, you're not alone. And, we're going to talk about that. So I'm going to start by saying I have tried therapy before, multiple times, actually, over the course of decades. Probably 12 to 14 years of combined therapy in the last 35 years. Traditional talk therapy, cognitive behavioral approaches, you name it. I've tried it all. And while I'm sure those methods work beautifully for many people, for me, I think they were like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teaspoon or something. The water just kept rising. What I didn't fully understand then was, that I was carrying this 35 years of stored trauma, and that affects more than just your mind and more than just your heart. It affects your entire body, how your body functions and operates. And then that kind of spills over into how you function and operate socially, romantically, basically in every single way, right? It's not just memories or difficult experiences, but trauma, the kind that lives in your body and in your nervous system and in the way you kind of unconsciously prepare yourself against the world every single day without even realizing it. And then about 2.5 months ago, Nate brought 9D breathwork into my life. I owe him my life in more ways than one, but especially for this, for recognizing what I needed and bringing me this gift. He's been doing it himself. He's realized how life-changing it is. And when he says life-changing and when I say life-changing, we don't say it as kind of that trendy buzzword or the appealing lure. We say it because it is literally life-changing. And he discovered things about himself that if you listened to the last off-script episode, you'll hear. This super private guy gets real vulnerable with me and his mouth just keeps on running. It was very hard to not interrupt him. And I know that I did at times, but my editor, I think, tried to get a lot of those interruptions out. But anyway, he got real vulnerable and he shared things that he learned about himself and was able to own his part in a story which he will never have closure for. And I've been incredibly fortunate because right before the new year, I came clean with 2 of my best friends about everything. And you'll learn about it in season 3. I came clean about everything. And these are friends I've had for decades, 4 decades, 5 decades. To tell you that I was terrified is the understatement of the century. But you know what happened? One of them shared her vulnerabilities and truths with me and opened up this whole new door to our friendship. And she loved me and she forgave me. And the other friend told me all the bad things that I had said that I did and I apologized for. She said she doesn't remember those things. She remembered all the fun things about growing up together and all the happy and good memories. And I realized I held those too. Like I also held those good memories, right? But now I can let go of the bad stuff because we've cleared the air. And me and these girls, we're in it for life as well. These 2 women gave me a gift I am so thankful for at exactly the time I needed it most. But anyway, now I got to go back to what I was talking about. I got myself rambling there. So for those of you who haven't heard me or us talk about it before, or who are new to the concept, I will briefly explain what 9D breathwork actually is, because it's unlike anything I'd experienced before. So it's a multi-dimensional therapeutic experience that combines several modalities into one powerful session, and it uses breathwork. This is an ancient form of breathwork it goes way back. It's also not trendy or a buzzword. But specifically it uses a somatic breathing technique that helps release stored trauma from the body. And it's layered with binaural beats, solfeggio frequencies, subliminal hypnotherapy, guided visualization, and soundscapes. It's called 9D because it works across 9 different dimensions of consciousness and healing. What makes it different from traditional therapy, and probably why this worked for me versus all the other ways I've tried before, it bypasses the thinking mind entirely. So you're not talking about your trauma. That gets really fucking old. You're not analyzing it or overanalyzing it or intellectualizing it. You don't have a doctor staring at you doing that. You're not trying to make sense of it with words. You're literally breathing it out of your body. And the science behind this is pretty damn fascinating. When we experience trauma, especially chronic or developmental trauma, it gets stored in our somatic memory, our body's memory system. Excuse me. This is why you can talk about a traumatic experience for years and still have your heart race, or your stomach clench up, or your breathing becomes shallow when you encounter a trigger, right? Your body remembers what your mind is trying to process. And breathwork accesses the autonomic nervous system directly. By using specific breathing patterns, you can shift your nervous system out of sympathetic activation, that fight or flight shit, and into parasympathetic regulation, which is rest and digest. 9D breathwork goes deeper though. The binaural beats create these different brainwave states. It sounds like a real trip. Theta and delta waves, they allow you to access subconscious material that's kind of been locked away for so long, right? The hypnotherapy component speaks directly to your subconscious mind, reprogramming limiting beliefs and trauma responses. Okay. So, here's where it gets really visceral though, like really physical. And I want to talk about this because if you ever try breath work and experience what I'm about to describe, I want you to know it's normal and it's not dangerous and it's actually your body doing exactly what it needs to do. So to start, I experience tetany during just about every session. And for those unfamiliar with the term, tetany is an involuntary muscle contraction. Your muscles seize up, they cramp, they lock into position. It does not hurt. It can look alarming, like really weird if you're not expecting it, but it's actually a sign that the body is releasing deeply stored tension and trauma. It's actually kind of like that thing that, the thing your kids made you play back, where you stand in the doorway and you push the backs of your hands against the door frame and you hold it for like 60 seconds or something. And then when you step away from the door frame, your arms start to rise up and you can't control it. Same idea. Okay. So, there's that. But what's profound to me, I can feel these manifestations in very specific areas of my body, and each one tells a story. Sometimes my legs will shake uncontrollably. And this doesn't happen through the whole session. Like different things happen through the session at different times. And it's I'm telling you, it's a trip, but it's like so worth it. And it's not scary. But yeah, my legs will shake and I'll get kind of this intense pressure in my thighs and knees, on the inner thigh around my knee area. It's like a tightness. It's like a cramping that makes my legs shake and kind of want to curl up. And I know in my body that this is from running, not literally running, but years and years of running, running from my trauma, running from healing, running from people, running from confrontation, from truth, from anything that felt too big or too damn scary to face. My legs have kind of been in a state of perpetual flight for decades. My muscles have always been tensed and ready to bolt at any moment. And now during these sessions, all of that stored energy and all of that unreleased tension from like 1,000 moments when I ran instead of stayed is finally releasing. I also get intense pressure in my forearms and my hands. Like I said, with tetany, they seize up and my fingers curl and lock, sometimes so tightly I can't open them until the wave passes, right? And again, it doesn't hurt. But I think this is because I've spent 35 years tense and holding things in, literally holding, gripping, clenching, white knuckling my way through life, holding on to control and holding backwards and holding in emotions and holding myself together when I felt like I was falling apart. So my hands and my arms have been doing the physical work of containing everything I couldn't let out. And another one that I think is wild is my throat. So I get this tightness around my throat and in my neck, this like it's like pressure that makes me feel like I have to cough or yawn and clear my throat. And I can do that. If you're doing this type of breath work, you are allowed to just listen to your body and let your body do what it needs to do, what you want to do it. So sometimes I do cough or yawn or clear my throat. And it doesn't last for the whole session, like I said, but sometimes it happens. And I know exactly what that is. It's years of being silent. It's years of swallowing words I should have said. It's years of being untruthful, sometimes to others, but mostly to myself. Years of I'm fine when I wasn't fine, Years of silence when I should have screamed, and years of polite agreement when I should have said no. All of that unexpressed truth just lodged right there in my throat chakra, right? In my voice box, in the physical mechanics of speech that I denied myself for so long. Like, isn't that crazy? So the first time I experienced these sensations during a session, I was frightened. Yeah, I got in my head and I tried to remember, don't get into your head, trust the process, trust your body. This isn't going to kill you. It's not even going to harm you. So just let it happen. Remember that. My facilitator just gently reminded me to breathe through it, that my body was safe. This was release, not re-traumatization. And he was right, because after the tetany passes and after the muscles, release, there's this incredible sense of lightness, like of space, like it's all floaty, like something that's been locked in place for decades, finally let go. And this is what somatic healing looks like. It's trauma literally leaving the body, not through words and not through understanding, but through sensation and through movement and through the body finally being allowed to complete the responses it started 35 years ago and never got to finish. And for me, it's working. My body is changing. My nervous system is changing. One of the big things for me that I just shared with someone the other day, I am dreaming now joyful dreams, like dreams in vivid, saturated color, dreams with bright green grass and blue sky and white fluffy clouds. I don't think I even did that when I was a kid. For most of my adult life, my dreams were weird or bad, or they were dark or anxiety ridden or just kind of gray and muted and confusing. Like even my subconscious was in survival mode or something, I can still hear my mom telling me when I was younger, just try to look at dreams and nightmares as entertainment for your sleep. Try not to get too hung up on the feelings and the scary things that happened. And I like scary movies, so I'm, literally starring in one while I'm sleeping. So I had to just kind of remember to look at it that way. And it helped me through a lot of really difficult nights. But of course, without context, that was the best she could do for me. But now I'm dreaming like in Technicolor. I'm having dreams where I'm laughing and I'm exploring and I'm creating, and my nervous system has regulated enough that even my sleep state has transformed. 2.5 months. That's all it's been. And it's not every day either. And the changes have been so profound for me that I'm now training to become a trauma-informed 9D breathwork facilitator myself, because that's what I do. I'm always learning and becoming certified in things and wanting to help people, basically. And I think in this case, if this changed my life this dramatically, I need to be able to offer it to others, and I want to. And here's a little aside. For those of you listening locally, soon I will be looking for people who would like to have some sessions for free when I need to get my clinical hours in. So if you've been curious, if you've been struggling, if you've been carrying trauma or holding anything in, whether it's anger or resentment, or like you're just hanging on to something you can't seem to let go of, it doesn't have to be trauma, and nothing else has worked, stay tuned, because I'll share more about that when the time comes. But back to the grief, because as transformative as this has been, as grateful as I am, as clear as I now feel, there has been an unexpected cost. So this is something that I think is kind of fascinating from a psychological perspective. Trauma doesn't just affect how we feel, right? It fundamentally alters how we perceive reality. And going back to all the other girls who were delicate flowers and I was the claw of a hammer, when you live in a chronic state of survival mode, and that's what unresolved trauma creates, right? Your brain is constantly scanning for threats. This is the work of the amygdala, your brain's alarm system. And trauma survivors, the alarm system becomes like hypersensitive and it's firing off warnings, even when you're like objectively safe. And this is exhausting, but it's also distorting. So when your nervous system is in constant fight or flight, you're operating from what neuroscientists call a defensive state. So in this state, you're not really able to accurately assess social situations or read nuance or connect authentically with others. That doesn't mean that you can't. It's definitely a lot harder to do because you're just trying to survive, right? Your perception is kind of filtered through this lens of threat detection, right? So think about what I just described, my body holding that running response in my legs for so long and the tension locked in my arms and my hands and the unexpressed truth stuck in my throat. That's a body in perpetual defense mode. And when your body is defending, your perception narrows, right? You can't see the full picture because you're too busy scanning for danger. But there's another layer to this. Trauma also affects memory consolidation and our sense of continuity. Okay? So sometimes we create narratives about people and relationships based not so much on who they actually are, but on who we need them to be at a time when we were too fragmented to see clearly. Make sense? So if you've never read the book, The Body Keeps the Score, I highly recommend it. The author explains that trauma survivors often struggle with what he calls integration. I've talked about integration before in other podcasts, even the regular seasons. It's the ability to hold multiple truths at once, to see complexity in people and situations. When you're in survival mode, everything becomes binary, right? It's safe or it's unsafe. It's good or it's bad. And I'm going to talk about this in a minute with the XY situation. So keep that in mind. It's with me or it's against me. There's no bandwidth at all for nuance. So what 9D breathwork did for me, what it's designed to do, is regulate my nervous system so profoundly that I finally have access to that integrated state. So as the trauma releases from my muscles and from my throat and all the places I've been holding it, my perception clears. I can be present. I can feel safe enough to perceive accurately, and I can hold complexity. And with that came the ability to see people as they truly are. Not as heroes or villains, but as complex human beings with their own values and their own choices and blind spots, Not as the versions I needed them to be when I was in survival mode, but as who they actually are. And this is where my grief began. Because what I saw with this new clarity was that some people I'd known for decades, people I'd considered aligned with my core values, had been making choices that directly contradicted those values. And I'd been too clouded by my own trauma response and too busy just trying to survive and too stuck in my own running pattern to see it clearly. Like, there's this one situation with a relative who I saw as someone who shared the same values as me, But now I've realized that this person is more performative, and I don't actually know the real version of who they are. And this is where things get really tricky for me because, if they weren't a family member, I don't even think I would be friends with this person. Like if I encountered a stranger in the world who was like this person, I'd be friendly, sure, but I would move on. I wouldn't pursue a friendship or anything like that with them. And that's really hard for me to reconcile because I love this person immensely, but we're just not the same. We're not even similar. And I thought we were, and I was wrong. And they probably think that we are similar and that we are the same. But I think that they're fooling themselves because they're being performative and they're probably stuck in that binary state and they don't know. They don't know what they're dealing with. And I'm going to let that one go for a minute. When you're healing from trauma, you're not just changing how you feel. You're changing your entire operating system. You're upgrading from survival mode to what psychologists call social engagement. That's a state where you can be present and connected and discerning and boundaried all at once. And sometimes when you upgrade your operating system, you realize that certain programs are no longer compatible, if that makes sense. As I stated earlier, I've spent my life and honestly portions of my career rooted in a very specific set of principles. Integrity, compassion, critical thinking, justice, which I would like to say right out of the gate is vastly different from social justice. Equity. These aren't abstract concepts to me. They're the foundation of how I try to move through the world and how I make decisions and how I evaluate what's right and wrong. So watching people I love, people I respected, consume and defend narratives that directly contradict those principles has been disorienting, to say the least. Heartbreaking, if I'm being honest. You all know, we all know, we're living in like an age of unprecedented information access, but also unprecedented manipulation. The psychology of media influence is well documented and frankly terrifying, but so many people don't even want to dig deeper and look into it. They just want to keep their head in the sand. And so many people will never admit that maybe they've been had. Maybe they've been conned, because ego is a huge thing. And this past year, I've spent a lot of time working on putting my own ego aside, taming that son of a bitch, and making things right and admitting my failures, my wrongdoings, and some of the things that I believed in actually ended up being a big fat scam. And, I got taken for a ride, whatever. It happens and it's human to admit that, but so many people do not want to. And that's confirmation bias, as well. Like our tendency to seek out information that confirms what we already believe. It has been weaponized by algorithms and media outlets. And I frequently talk about how social media is a cesspool. And those of us who use it, myself included, are being manipulated in the most subtle ways that we don't even realize it's happening. And we are being influenced to do certain things and to say certain things and to react emotionally and without fact. These systems feed us content that triggers emotional responses. You know why? Because emotion drives engagement and engagement drives profit. Truth is like secondary or sometimes irrelevant entirely. And that's something I've been seeing just this past week. And people are blowing my mind with the things that they are sharing because they are not the people or the beliefs or values I thought they held when they are sharing these things. And there's a huge group of people, that will still call somebody a conspiracy theorist for making these claims, despite the fact that it is well researched and well documented. And with all of that unprecedented information out there, it's all out there for your consumption. But people are ignoring it. There is a phenomenon called reality tunnels. It's a term coined by philosopher Robert Anton Wilson. The idea is that we don't perceive objective reality. We perceive a filtered version based on our beliefs and our experiences and all the information we're exposed to, right? We all live in slightly different reality tunnels. That's normal to some degree. But here's where it gets concerning. Okay. When those tunnels are deliberately constructed by, say, media sources with specific agendas, when they're designed to trigger fear or outrage or tribal thinking, people can end up in reality tunnels so divorced from factual reality that bridging the gap becomes nearly impossible. Right? The walls of those tunnels become kind of reinforced with every piece of confirming information, every like, every share, every algorithm-fed video that tells them they're right and everyone else is the problem. I've watched people I love fall into these tunnels. I've fallen into these tunnels, smart people, good people, people who under different circumstances would never have accepted the narratives that they now defend with startling conviction. People who used to question authority now parrot these talking points without examination, and they willingly and openly share some of the most idiotic statements I have ever seen, like things that just aren't grounded in reality. People who used to value compassion now justify cruelty. People who claim they don't judge, but that's all they do. People who used to demand evidence now accept conspiracy theories as gospel. People who look at me and don't realize that more than one thing can be true at once. And not just because I don't believe X, but, if I don't believe X, it doesn't automatically mean I believe Y. I don't trust X, but that also doesn't mean I just trust Y. Just because there's two sides doesn't mean it's one or the other. But people don't want to have these conversations with me. They just assume they know what I believe in and what I think and what I feel because they know that I don't believe in, think, or feel this. So it's just one or the other. And that's such a terrible space to get yourself into. But yeah, they don't want to have these conversations with me to find out what my truth really is and what I really do believe in. And they get really defensive when they do have conversations with me because they want to shut it down. When I meet them with verifiable facts, because they can't come back at me with their own verifiable facts because they've come into the conversation uninformed and unprepared, I don't hold that against them, but I do take issue with it when I'm being perceived as someone I'm not based on that XY thing. So anyway, I went off on a tangent again. I got to get back on track here. This is going to end up being a really stupid long episode. So here's the grief. Okay. I can see how it happened. I understand the psychology. I know about the evolutionary impulse towards tribalism, the way our brains are wired to seek belonging, even at the cost of truth. I know about the dopamine hits from feeling like you're part of an in-group, the comfort of simple explanations for complex problems, the seductive nature of narratives that make you feel special, enlightened, or even victimized. I get it intellectually. Okay. But emotionally, it feels like loss. It feels like watching someone you love disappear, calling out to them and realizing they can't even hear you anymore because the walls of their reality tunnel have become soundproof. Because the person I thought I knew, the person who valued evidence and questioned authority instead of for vulnerable people is still standing in front of me, but they're defending positions now that harm the very people they used to protect. They're sharing misinformation and they're justifying injustice. They're consuming media that distorts their perception of reality so completely that we can't even agree on basic facts anymore. Dr. Stephen Hassan, an expert on undue influence and authoritarian control, talks about something he calls identity disruption. It's what happens when someone's authentic identity becomes overshadowed by a constructed identity built on a specific set of beliefs, often introduced by a group or ideology. Okay, so the person is still there, their body, their face, their laugh, it's all still there, but they're operating from a different framework, sometimes so different that the values you thought you shared become unrecognizable. And when you're finally clear-headed enough to see this, when the fog of your own trauma has lifted, like in my case, and you can perceive with accuracy, with integration, like I said, and with clarity, it's kind of devastating, It feels like I spent 35 years looking at the world through this dirty, cracked window, and now someone's cleaned it. I can see everything. I can see the distortions in the media they consume, the logical fallacies and the arguments that they make, the ways that they've changed, that they can't even see themselves. And sometimes I wish I could see it. I couldn't see it so clearly, right? But I can't unsee it now. The truth is out. It's literally released from my throat where I'd been holding it back for decades. I also wanted to talk about ambiguous loss. I've discussed this extensively through season 1 and in my book, All These Beautiful Things, because I'm dealing with this with my mom who has dementia, right? This is a pretty core theme in my life. The term is coined by Dr. Pauline Boss, and it typically refers to losses that occur without closure or understanding, like when someone goes missing or when a loved one has dementia and is physically present but psychologically gone, right? Absent. But I would argue that there's another form of ambiguous loss that doesn't get talked about enough, and that's the loss of who you thought someone was. The loss of a relationship that you believed was built on shared values, only to discover now that you can see clearly that maybe those values were never as aligned as you thought, or that they've diverged so dramatically that the relationship, as you understood it, no longer exists. And this is the grief I'm living with right now. These people haven't died. They haven't moved away. In many cases, I still see them regularly. But the relationship I thought we had, built on these mutual understanding and these similar or aligned principles and shared reality, that's gone. And what makes it so complicated and so layered, they don't even know it's gone, right? From their perspective, nothing has changed. They're the same person they've always been. If anything, they might feel, I'm the one who's changed, and I have. I'm the one who's being difficult. I'm not. I'm the one who's pulling away for no reason, but I'm not. I have changed. My clarity has changed. My capacity to see things as they actually are, rather than as I needed them to be when I was in survival mode, has changed. And that changes everything. So remember what I said about my body holding that running response, right? For over 3 decades, when things got uncomfortable, my instinct was to run and to avoid and to not look too closely, because looking closely and seeing clearly and speaking truthfully, those things felt dangerous to my traumatized system. But now that I've released that pattern, now that my legs aren't in a constant state of preparation to flee, I can stay. I can look, I can see. And what I see sometimes breaks my heart. This is the paradox of healing, right? You get better, you get clearer, you get stronger, and sometimes that means you lose people. Not because you're pushing them away out of dysfunction or fear, but because you're finally healthy enough to see that the connection wasn't what you thought it was, or that it can't continue in its current form without compromising your own healing or your own peace or even your own integrity. Grief counselors will tell you that all loss deserves to be mourned. Even when it's the right thing, even when you know logically that you're better off, even when you're absolutely certain you're on the right path, even when you're grateful for the clarity. You can be confident in your growth and still devastated by what it costs you. I know I'm healing. I can feel it in my body. It's in my dreams and the way I move through the world now, and how I feel around my immediate circle. I know I'm on the right side of my own values. I don't second guess that for a moment. This breath work has given me a level of certainty and groundedness I have never had before. But I also know I'm grieving, and both things are true at once. And this is what integration actually looks like, right? Holding multiple truths simultaneously. I can be grateful for my healing and sad about what I'm losing. I can love people and also recognize that our paths have diverged. I can honor what was while accepting what is, right? I can know that I'm doing the right thing and still feel the ache of it. So y'all know that my nonfiction books are what I like to call self-help, rooted in personal experience. So I'm going to come at you with some advice because what do you do, when you find yourself in this position? When clarity reveals that you and people you care about are no longer aligned, when healing has given you the capacity to see what you couldn't see before, and what you see as incompatibility, you set boundaries, not as punishment, not as manipulation, not even necessarily as a statement, but as an act of self-preservation. I've talked about it before, as a commitment to protecting what you've worked so hard to build. And what I've learned, what I'm still learning, boundaries aren't walls. They are not about shutting people out entirely or making them wrong or punishing them for not being who you need them to be. I just want to be clear on that. Boundaries are about protecting your peace and your energy and your emotional well-being. They're about being intentional with where you invest your finite resources, your time and your attention and your emotional labor. So there's a therapist who specializes in boundary work. I think her name is Dr. Nedra Glover. Oh, damn, I wish I had written that down. She says that boundaries are expectations and needs that help you feel safe and comfortable in your relationships. Note that word, your relationships. Your relationships. You get to decide what you need to feel safe, not what someone else thinks you should need, not what you needed 5 years ago when you were still running, not any of that. It's what you need now in your current state of clarity and healing. And for me, this has meant becoming very intentional and honestly pretty carefree in a way about where I spend my time and emotional energy. And I think that carefree quality comes from finally releasing all that freaking tension I was holding in my arms and my hands. I'm not gripping so tightly anymore, and I'm not white knuckling my way through relationships that don't serve me. I can let go now. I'm choosing to invest in people I share common values with today, not the people I used to share them with, and not the people I wished shared them. Let me say that again, because it's important. Not the people I wish shared my values, not the potential version of them, not who they might become if they just understood what I understand. Who they are right now, today, with the choices they're making and the narratives they're consuming. And that's why I often tell people, when they ask for advice on stuff, I just say, you can say goodbye to somebody and it doesn't have to be forever. I mean, I've done this. I've done this through my life. Sometimes it is forever, and that's fine. But my life isn't over yet. So, people could come back. I've often had relationships come back into my life again. And it's great, Reason, season, lifetime. I've talked about that in other episodes. But anyway, it's not about being rigid or unforgiving. It's not about demanding perfection from someone or ideological purity. Okay. It's about being honest. If someone's choices and values have shifted so dramatically that being around them leaves me feeling depleted, confused, or gaslit, or in conflict with my own integrity, I need to pull back. And it's not with anger, and it's not with drama. It's not with a manifesto about everything they're doing wrong. It's just with clarity and a quiet distance. I will admit that I responded on social media to someone's post, and after about half an hour, I deleted it because I realized it wasn't sitting right with me that I had said what I said, when all I have to do is just create a quiet distance. That's all. I don't need to create more drama because that feeds the stupid algorithm. And I think that's why it kind of sat in me in a way that felt very uncomfortable. And it's not because I wasn't trying to speak my truth. I don't need to in this case. There's just no way that in this particular case, I will fact someone out of a position they didn't even fact themselves into, if that makes sense. So for you, some practical ways to navigate this, for those of you who might be in a similar situation. First of all, you have to give yourself permission to grieve. Don't rush the process. Don't tell yourself you should be over it by now. Don't let anyone else tell you that either. Loss is loss, even when it's the right choice. Communicate when possible, but don't require understanding. You can tell someone, I need some distance right now, or I need to step back from this relationship for a while, without needing them to agree or understand or validate your reasons. Your boundary does not ever require their approval. You also need to release the need to convince. If someone is deeply embedded in a reality tunnel that differs from yours, trying to argue them out of it is usually it usually just kind of entrenches them further, right? So save your energy. Like I said, can't fact someone out of something save your energy. You can't logic someone out of a position that they didn't logic themselves into. And remember that you spent years silencing your truth. Don't waste your newly freed voice trying to convince people who aren't ready to hear it. And that's why I deleted that comment that I made on that post. Seek community with people who share your values now. So don't isolate in your grief, right? Find people, the ones who see the world with similar clarity or who kind of reinforce your growth rather than challenge your sanity, or people who remind you that you're not alone, or crazy or overreacting. You want like-minded people. There's nothing wrong with that. It's, some people will say, well, then you're just living in an echo chamber. That's not true at all. It's not true at all. Remember that boundaries are flexible because people can grow and change and wake up from their reality tunnels. I did. I'm probably still stuck in some that I need to come out of. I'm working on myself. I'm growing. I'm learning. I'm not just blindly accepting. Your boundary today doesn't have to be permanent, right? But it does need to be honored right now in this moment for your own well-being. I also want you to trust your body. One of the gifts of somatic healing, like 9D breathwork, is that you develop a relationship with your body's wisdom, right? So you might initially go into this thinking, it's scary, I don't want to do this. You might get in your head and you start to panic during the breath work. You have to teach yourself, and it may not happen in the first session or the first 5 sessions or the first 10, especially during the breath hold phases. You really get into your head and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to die or whatever. It doesn't happen. You have to trust your body to know. And what that's meant for me is I have been able to actually train my body to do the breath holds completely and fully without any panic or anything. But yeah, so you have to listen and trust and develop a relationship with your body's wisdom. So being around someone makes your chest tight or your stomach clench or you're breathing shallow. Listen to that. Okay. So your nervous system is giving you information. It's just information. So after 35 years of ignoring those signals, for me, of running instead of listening, holding tension instead of releasing it, I finally have the ability to hear what my body has been trying to tell me all along because of 9D breathwork. And you develop this relationship, and it's really friggin' amazing. Setting boundaries after years of not having them or after years of being too traumatized to even know what you needed, it can feel harsh for sure. It can feel mean and it can feel selfish, but it's not. It's actually one of the most loving things you can do for yourself and honestly for the other person too. Because pretending to be aligned when you're not, it doesn't serve anyone. It just creates a surface relationship, right? It's just performance. And it's exhausting, just like everything else. Something I want to acknowledge, not everything about this journey has been painful. Yes, there's grief. Yes, there's loss. Yes, it's hard to navigate relationships with this new level of awareness, but there's something deeply liberating about clarity for me. For so long, I moved through the world in this fog and I made decisions based on fear, on survival, on what I thought I was supposed to do or be. I tolerated things I shouldn't ever have tolerated. I stayed in situations that harmed me. I gave energy to people and causes that didn't deserve it simply because I didn't have the clarity or capacity to discern. So my body was doing all the work keeping me safe that my conscious mind couldn't do, right? My legs were ready to run and my hands were gripping and my throat was closed. And all of that protected me in its way. It kept me alive, but it also kept me trapped. But now I know what I value. I know what I stand for. I know who I am when I'm not operating from trauma. And to me, knowing that is just such a huge gift. The breath work hasn't just released trauma, it's revealed me. The version of me that existed maybe before 35 years of survival mode kind of calcified around me like armor, right? Like I'm happier and I'm joyful and I'm creative and I'm clear and I'm intentional. I'm forgiven. I'm loved. I'm discerning. I'm boundaried. Yes, but also free. I'm dreaming in color. I'm sleeping deeply. I'm making decisions without second guessing myself into paralysis. I'm saying no without guilt and yes without reservation. And I'm choosing relationships that nourish me rather than drain me, even if those relationships are controversial or unconventional. I don't care. My legs don't need to run anymore, so I can finally stand still and be present. My hands don't need to grip and hold, so I can receive and release with ease. My throat is open, so I can speak my truth, right? Even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs me relationships, even if it costs me listeners, because maybe I've pissed off a lot of people during this episode, and not just because it's really friggin' long. Is this ever going to end? Am I ever going to stop talking? Anyway, is it worth the grief? Absolutely, 1,000 times over. But the truth is, I can't go back, even if I wanted to, and I don't. I can't unsee what I now see. I can't restore the trauma I've released. I don't want to. I can't return to the fog. The clarity is permanent. Barring some new trauma that dysregulates my system again. And I'm committed to not letting that happen, like absolutely committed. So I'm moving forward and I'm honoring the grief when it comes. I set boundaries when I need to. I'm investing in the relationships that align with who I am today. And I trust that the people who are meant to walk this path with me will either still be here or new people will appear who are aligned with this version of me. So where I land, healing is worth it, even when it comes with grief, even when clarity costs you those relationships you thought would last forever, even when growing means growing apart from people you've loved for decades, even when your body shakes and seizes and coughs up 35 years of held trauma in the process. If you're in this place right now, if you're healing and realizing that some people can't come with you on this journey, please know that you're not alone. It's okay to grieve, and protecting your peace isn't selfish. It's sacred and it's necessary, and it's part of, the healing itself. Anybody listening who knows me, if you feel me distancing myself, no, it isn't personal. It's just necessary. We all have to protect our peace at different points, and it doesn't even mean that it's forever. We all have to honor our growth, and sometimes that means loving people from a distance. There's a quote I've been holding on to lately from author Glennon Doyle. We can do hard things. And this is a hard thing, grieving people who are still alive and setting boundaries with people you love, choosing your peace over what's familiar, and trusting your clarity even when it isolates you, and letting your body shake and release and tell its truth even when it's uncomfortable. But you can do it. I'm doing it. We're doing it together, right? For those of you who are curious about 9D breathwork, who've been carrying your own trauma or resentment, or you're just holding something in that you just cannot seem to let go of, whether it's a person or a belief or an experience, anything, if you're holding something in and you are ready for something that actually works, I encourage you to explore it. Find a facilitator, try a session, see what shifts. And if you experience tetany, if your body seizes and shakes, and if you feel pressure in strange places, remember that's normal. That's release. You are going to feel literal energy through your body. Like, you will feel it. It's a trip. I can't even explain it. But this is your body finally getting to complete what started so long ago, And for those of you in my local area, I mean it when I say I'll be looking for people to work with once I'm required to get my clinical hours in. If you're interested, if you're ready, if you've been holding anything, and you want to let it go, reach out. Let's talk. This modality changed my life, and I would be honored to hold space for your healing too. Take care of yourself, protect your peace, trust your clarity, listen to what your body is trying to tell you, and remember growth, even when it's painful, when it hurts like hell, when it comes with shaking hands and a tight throat and legs that want to run, it's always worth it. It really is. Believe me. Okay. Now, before I leave, if anyone's made it this far, and hopefully Jim has, I have a question from our faithful friend Jim about a recent podcast episode. And since his timing was really good, I'm going to answer it now. About the off-script episode, I think it was from last week, about Brendan Dassey and Nathan Carman and how the police handle suspects with autism and other spectrum-related situations. Jim asked me, why do you think it is that when law enforcement would purposely feed info and try to get a confession from someone they obviously know wasn't involved, just to close a case, to make them look good, something else? It's a good question. I want to remind everybody I'm not an expert in this. I've witnessed interrogations, but I've not done them myself. I don't have experience or training in this type of thing, and I'm still 100% in full support of law enforcement when it's done right. So these are my opinions only. So, yeah, this is the right question to ask, and it's one that bothers me too. And what I think happens, and it's not always as simple as they knew he wasn't involved, but wanted to close the case anyway. I just want to be clear on that as well. With Brendan Dassey specifically, I think the investigators genuinely believed Stephen Avery was guilty, and they believed Brendan had information or was involved. But where it gets problematic for me, once they decided he was involved, they stopped investigating and started confirming. And this happens a lot. Once, they get laser focused on one subject, they stop investigating. And that's confirmation bias. They interpreted everything Brendan said through the lens of he's guilty and we just need him to admit it. They fed him details because they thought they were helping him remember what actually happened. In their minds, they weren't manufacturing a confession. They were guiding a confused, scared kid towards this truth they believed he already knew. But obviously, that's really fucking dangerous, because when someone is suggestible, cognitively limited, or desperate to please authority, they'll give you whatever answer makes you stop pressuring them. It's like being in a literal pressure cooker. And investigators mistake that compliance for truth, right? And then the broader problem, law enforcement officers are often trained using interrogation techniques designed to break down resistance and obtain confessions. The Reed technique, for example, it's built on the assumption that the person being interrogated is guilty, and the goal is to get them to admit it. And these techniques work on guilty people, but they also work too well on innocent people, especially ones who are young and neurodivergent and intellectually disabled or just plain friggin' terrified, right? When you combine that with pressure to solve high-profile cases, a belief maybe that they already have the right person, or a lack of training on how neurodivergent people communicate under stress, even the institutional momentum, once someone becomes a suspect, you get wrongful confessions, and it's not good. Do they know the person is innocent? Sometimes. Sure. Maybe subconsciously they have doubts. I don't know. I think more often they've convinced themselves the person is guilty. They've built a narrative. They've invested time and resources, of course, and backing down means admitting that they were wrong, which is hard for anyone, especially in a system that rewards convictions. So, closing cases to look good. That's definitely a factor in some cases. Departments face public pressure, of course. Detectives have clearance rates. At least that's what I've been told. Prosecutors want wins, right? And once a case is solved, there's little incentive to revisit it, even when the evidence suggests they got it wrong. But I don't think most investigators set out to frame somebody they know is innocent. I think that they convince themselves they have the right person, and then they use whatever tools they have, including problematic interrogation techniques, to get the confession that confirms what they already believe, right? They're human too, right? And what's scary too is that they can pass polygraphs themselves. They can testify in court with confidence because they genuinely believe they got the right person. And that's why I think the system is broken. It's not just about corrupt cops, though those exist. It's about a system that prioritizes confessions over evidence, and it doesn't really account for neurodiversity. And that kind of makes it almost impossible to undo a wrongful conviction once it happens. And with Nathan Carman, his case is slightly different because he was never convicted, right? But the same dynamic applies. Once law enforcement and the public decide he seemed guilty based on his effect and behavior, and he may very well have been. I don't know. I'm not saying one way or the other. I have questions. Everything he did, though, was interpreted through that lens, right? Flat effect became lack of remorse. Literal communication became suspicious. And the narrative solidified long before the evidence did, right? And this is 100% why I don't buy narratives until they earn it. Because once a narrative takes hold, in law enforcement, in the media, social media, and public opinion, it's almost impossible to dislodge it, even when the evidence doesn't support it. I hope that kind of explains my perspective. I really need to shut the fuck up. I think this may be my longest episode ever, and if anyone is still here, I would be completely amazed. Thank you so much, though, for being here. Thank you for listening to this very personal exploration of grief and growth and what it looks like when your body finally tells the truth. If you're on your own healing journey, thank you for doing the work. The world needs people who are clear and boundaried and committed to their own growth and integrity for sure. I just wanted to say I've recently been offered the opportunity to partner up and run ads on this podcast. It's your fault. All of you have helped me to get to the point of monetization. It's a good blame, honestly. I don't want to run ads. I don't want to do this to you guys. I think that my episodes are important enough to not be interrupted, especially when they're long as fuck like this one. Like, wow. And look, when I sit with someone, I'm generally pretty quiet. I'm a good listener. I like to listen. I don't like to talk so much. So doing that here is kind of different because it's just me talking, unless I have a guest on that I'm interrupting. But I still don't want to, run ads. I want to keep this going and I want to keep it interruption free. And I'm going to do that for as long as I can. I promise. Hopefully that will be forever. Having said all that, if you do want to support the production costs, all the information is in the show notes. You can make a one-time donation of any amount, even $1. It all adds up, right? You can do monthly donations. You can support me by purchasing things, whatever. Just check out my coffee. That's where you can do the support stuff. It's in the show notes. Everything that I make financially goes right back into my work, which I love to do. And I want to keep completely accessible to everyone, and without interruption. Thank you so much for being here. And I will see you in the next episode. Hopefully a much shorter one. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Unbound with Beth Curry. Join the conversation in the Facebook group or visit author.bethcurry.com. Want to support the show? Head to ko-fi.com/Unbound podcast. Until next time, stay unbound.